She has not had an official press conference in 258 days. Her last network interview was nearly 3 weeks ago.
But that doesn't mean that Hillary Clinton isn't getting her message out. Recently, she became the first presidential candidate to launch a campaign podcast, With Her, produced by Pineapple Street Media. If you're looking for hard-hitting questions, though, With Her could be a waste of your time.
Full disclosure, I'm not a journalist and I'm not impartial.
In fact, co-host Max Linsky calls himself a huge fan of Clinton, who also gets billing as a co-host. So instead of hearing about free trade or missing emails, we get toe-curling political pillow talk like this.
Are there any mornings for you where you wake up and you're just like, oh, all right, today's, I'm not sure about today. Like, I would rather just not, if today could not happen, that would be great.
Yes. The short answer is yes.
But just because With Her is saccharine doesn't mean it's not smart. Embracing the podcast format could boost Clinton with millennial voters, who make up a disproportionate share of podcast listeners. The softball Q&A could also help humanize Clinton, whose unfavorable ratings are still dangerously high. And if the race with Donald Trump gets tighter, Clinton could always use With Her to deliver some sharp barbs, like this shot at Bernie Sanders on a Politico podcast back in April.
He's a relatively new Democrat, and in fact, I'm not even sure he is one.
The best part, With Her is without any tough follow-up questions.
So I listened to this entire episode, and it made me want to grab my computer and throw it through the window of our offices.
This is voter outreach. This is that group of people who listens to podcasts while they're going out on their jog, while they're commuting into the office. This is reality TV podcast style. Here's what it's like to run for president. But it's also a chance for her to control her message, something that she has always been great at doing, at least that we've seen the last few years. Yeah. So I don't know that she's avoiding the media as much as it is reaching out to people in spite of the media. It's kind of the podcast version of her daughter's speech at the convention.
Nice analogy. I like that.
I'd like to spring to the defense of millennials who you so viciously attacked a moment ago by suggesting they might respond to this. The millennials I know, including my two sons, wouldn't be caught dead listening to this drivel. Okay? No one who isn't already deep in the satchel for Hillary Clinton is going to waste precious moments of life listening to this. If you need proof, go back to the bygone era of Deval Patrick's weekly podcasts when he became governor of Massachusetts. Introduced with much fanfare, listened to by no one, quietly dropped a few months into his term. However, I do agree with you that it's smart to keep her away from actual journalists. You mentioned in the piece that her last network TV interview was that disastrous Fox interview with Chris Wallace, where she got caught up in lying all over again about her perfidy in the email scandal. Very smart. If they're smart, they'll keep her locked in the basement let her out for the debates, but keep her away from us.
She has a problem with the press. She doesn't like the press. But any campaign in 2016 would at some point have come to the conclusion that they need a podcast. Podcasts are it. They're hot right now, just like Twitter is it and hot, and it's a way to get your message directly to the people. So I don't find this particularly innovative. I agree with John. It's not particularly, scintillating content. It goes to, I think, also Hillary Clinton's efforts, as most presidential candidates do, to humanize themselves, to make themselves feel, to get off script in a controlled kind of way. I always felt bad for Hillary Clinton when she was on Saturday Night Live because she was trying so hard to be casual, just like she tries so hard at everything, and she just never seemed casual. And I think the same thing comes across here.
She's like the bartender skit, though.
I think Joanna gets it exactly right. I think we're trying way too hard to mash two different issues together here.
Break them down. Separate them.
Well, one of the issues is her inaccessibility to the press, and I think that's a serious issue. She hasn't given a press conference since 1952, I guess. It's time for her to do a few press conferences and make herself available for some more tough questioning. But the podcast is not how she's avoiding the media. It's just a smart thing to do. It's a smart thing to do. That doesn't mean she's executing it well. I will confess, I downloaded it. I forgot to listen to it.
I want her to go on Mark Maron's podcast. Like, if she were really going to be bold about it, she'd go on Mark Maron's podcast. She'd go on, Howard Stern doesn't have a podcast. He has a radio show, but she'd go on a show with a really cutting interviewer.
You know what? I listened to a chunk of that Glenn Thrush Politico podcast where she took that dig at Bernie Sanders, and it wasn't as edgy as Mark Maron would have been, but they were good questions. And the interesting thing is when she puts herself in a setting where she gets those and she has to sit there and answer them. The Chris Wallace interview, I totally agree, was a disaster, but I think it might be a disaster in part because she keeps hiding and raising the stakes. In this interview with Glenn Thrush back in April, she was quite good. Yeah. She is a smart woman who can articulate her viewpoint well if she's in the habit of doing so, but if she's not, then she's not ready when she has to.
That's it. You get out of the habit, and it shows when she does do it. And by the way, I said press conferences specifically, I think tough interviews are just as good. I mean, I think the news conference these days has gotten to be kind of a bit of performance art with the journalists themselves as the performers. So there's a limited utility to that, but she's got to subject herself to tough, independent questions.
All right, there you have it. Hillary Clinton